Eritrea, a small nation in the Horn of Africa, has a history marked by colonization, war, and resilience. Once an Italian colony, later occupied by the British and then annexed by Ethiopia, Eritrea fought one of Africa's longest and most brutal independence wars. At the center of this 30-year struggle stood a determined, fiercely independent revolutionary, Isaias Afwerki. Isaias is not just the president of Eritrea, he is its founding father, military strategist, and head of state since independence in 1993. Revered by supporters as a freedom fighter and vilified by critics as a dictator, Isaias has shaped Eritrea into a highly centralized state with no opposition parties, no free press, and no national elections for over 3 decades. His story is one of revolution and repression, victory and control. From guerrilla warfare in the mountains to closed-door diplomacy and unflinching autocracy, the life of Isaias Afwerki is deeply entwined with the fate of Eritrea itself. 2. Early life and education. Isaias Afwerki was born on February 2, 1946, in Asmara, the capital of present-day Eritrea. At the time, Eritrea was under British administration, following Italy's defeat in World War II. He grew up in a society grappling with identity, colonial legacy, and rising nationalist sentiments. His family came from the Tigrinya ethnic group, Eritrea's largest. Isaias attended primary and secondary schools in Asmara, where he showed signs of intelligence and discipline. In 1965, he earned a scholarship to study engineering at Haile Selassie University in Addis Ababa, Ethiopia's capital. However, his time in university was short-lived. By the mid-1960s, tensions between Eritrean nationalists and the Ethiopian imperial government had escalated. The dream of independence began to take root among many Eritrean youth, including Isaias. Inspired by anti-colonial movements and frustrated by Ethiopia's annexation of Eritrea, Isaias made a pivotal decision. He dropped out of university and joined the growing armed struggle for Eritrea's independence. In 1966, he traveled to China for military and ideological training. During his time there, Isaias studied guerrilla warfare tactics and was exposed to Marxist-Leninist thought, which would influence his leadership style in the years to come. He returned to Eritrea with a clear mission, to help lead the fight for liberation. This early period shaped his revolutionary mindset, disciplined, ideologically rigid, and skeptical of compromise. It was the beginning of a lifetime of struggle, both on the battlefield and in the political arena. 3. Joining the independence struggle. By the late 1960s, Eritrea's independence movement was gaining momentum. After leaving university and receiving military training in China, Isaias Afwerki returned to Eritrea in 1967 with a renewed sense of purpose and revolutionary zeal. He joined the Eritrean Liberation Front (ELF), the main organization fighting against Ethiopian rule at the time. However, Isaias quickly became disillusioned with the ELF's internal divisions, tribal favoritism, and lack of strategic clarity. He believed the movement needed a stronger ideological foundation, better discipline, and a unified command structure. Tensions between Isaias and ELF leadership grew rapidly. By the early 1970s, these tensions led to a split. Isaias, along with other like-minded fighters, broke away from the ELF and formed a rival group that would later become the Eritrean People's Liberation Front (EPLF). The EPLF was different from its predecessor in several key ways. It emphasized self-reliance, strict discipline, and Marxist principles. It adopted non-sectarian and non-ethnic approaches to organizing fighters. It established a hierarchical and centralized command, with Isaias playing a dominant role in decision-making. Under Isaias's leadership, the EPLF began operating in the rugged mountains and deserts of Eritrea, launching guerrilla attacks against the much larger and better-equipped Ethiopian army. Despite limited resources, the EPLF gained popular support in rural areas, built underground schools and clinics, and maintained a reputation for order and efficiency. Throughout the 1970s and 1980s, Isaias Afwerki emerged as a military strategist, political thinker, and uncompromising leader. His determination, ideological clarity, and organizational discipline turned the EPLF into the most formidable liberation force in the Horn of Africa. By the end of the 1980s, the EPLF had become the dominant force in Eritrea's independence movement, poised to achieve what once seemed impossible: liberation from Ethiopian control. 4. Founding of EPLF, Eritrean People's Liberation Front. The Eritrean People's Liberation Front (EPLF) was officially established in the early 1970s, emerging from a split within the Eritrean Liberation Front (ELF). At the heart of this new organization was Isaias Afwerki, who had become increasingly dissatisfied with the ELF's leadership, ethnic divisions, and lack of ideological discipline. The founding of the EPLF marked a turning point in Eritrea's liberation struggle. The group was based on key principles that reflected both Marxist-Leninist ideology and practical lessons learned from guerrilla warfare and global revolutionary movements. Isaias, heavily influenced by his military and ideological training in China, played a central role in shaping the EPLF's vision, structure, and strategy. Key features of the EPLF under Isaias: secular and nationalist. The EPLF rejected religious and ethnic favoritism, seeking to unify Eritreans across divisions. Self-reliant and independent. It refused foreign military or political domination, unlike other African liberation movements that aligned closely with the USSR or the West. Highly disciplined. Fighters were expected to follow strict codes of conduct. Internal accountability and ideological education were emphasized. Mass mobilization. The EPLF organized schools, clinics, and agricultural projects in liberated areas, functioning like a state within a state. Centralized leadership. Though the EPLF had a formal leadership council, Isaias Afwerki quickly emerged as its most influential figure, respected, feared, and rarely challenged. By the mid-1970s, the EPLF had begun consolidating its power, clashing not only with the Ethiopian army but also engaging in deadly conflicts with the ELF, leading to what became known as the Eritrean Civil War 1972–1981. Eventually, the EPLF emerged victorious, absorbing or disbanding rival factions. As the 1980s progressed, the EPLF became a professional and ideologically cohesive liberation army. Isaias served as Secretary General, directing military campaigns, internal policies, and international diplomacy. The organization's disciplined ranks and widespread support among Eritreans made it a formidable force. By the end of the decade, the EPLF was in a position to launch its final assault against Ethiopia's Derg regime, a battle that would define the next chapter of both Eritrea's and Isaias Afwerki's history. 5. Victory and independence. By the late 1980s, the Eritrean People's Liberation Front (EPLF), under the strategic command of Isaias Afwerki, had become a seasoned and powerful revolutionary force. After nearly 30 years of armed struggle, the dream of Eritrean independence was within reach. Meanwhile, Ethiopia was in turmoil. The Derg regime, a Marxist military junta led by Mengistu Haile Mariam, was collapsing under the pressure of multiple armed rebellions and a crumbling economy. In 1991, with coordination between the EPLF and the Tigray People's Liberation Front (TPLF), a group also fighting the Ethiopian regime, the final offensive was launched. The fall of Asmara and Addis Ababa. May 24, 1991. EPLF forces entered Asmara, the Eritrean capital, effectively liberating the entire country. Just days later, rebel forces in Ethiopia captured Addis Ababa, forcing Mengistu to flee. The victory was not only military, it was symbolic. Eritrea had achieved what many believed was impossible: full liberation from Ethiopian domination. Path to official independence. Though Eritrea had de facto independence in 1991, Isaias and the EPLF sought international recognition through a democratic process. In April 1993, the United Nations oversaw a referendum in which over 99% of Eritreans voted for independence. On May 24, 1993, Eritrea officially became an independent nation, and Isaias Afwerki was declared its first president. A new nation, a new leader. With victory came immense national pride. Isaias was celebrated as a liberator, a nation builder, and a symbol of unity. His leadership style, decisive, disciplined, and visionary, was embraced by many Eritreans who believed they were entering a new era of peace, dignity, and development. The new government, led by the People's Front for Democracy and Justice (PFDJ), the renamed EPLF, promised to draft a constitution, hold elections, and build institutions from the ground up. Isaias emphasized self-reliance, rejecting aid dependency and foreign interference. However, beneath the surface of national pride, power was consolidating tightly around one man. Isaias Afwerki, the revolutionary, was now becoming the architect of a centralized and increasingly authoritarian state. 6. Early years of leadership 1993–1998. After leading Eritrea to independence in 1993, Isaias Afwerki began what many hoped would be a new chapter of peace, democracy, and development. As the country's first president, head of government, commander-in-chief, and leader of the ruling People's Front for Democracy and Justice (PFDJ), Isaias held absolute control over the newly formed state. Nation building and promises of democracy. In the early years, Eritrea was seen as a promising new African nation. A new constitution was drafted in 1997, promising multi-party democracy, rule of law, and civil rights. The government focused on infrastructure, education, and healthcare, rebuilding a country devastated by decades of war. Isaias promoted self-reliance, rejecting reliance on international donors and encouraging Eritreans to work together to develop the nation. Eritrea under Isaias was initially praised by international observers for its discipline, low corruption, and strong sense of national unity. Signs of centralization and control. But beneath the surface, cracks began to appear. Although the constitution was finalized in 1997, it was never implemented. No elections were held, and opposition parties were banned. The PFDJ remained the only legal political organization, and dissenting voices were marginalized. Press freedom, though initially present, was steadily eroded. Isaias began consolidating power, ensuring that state institutions, the judiciary, media, and civil society were either under his control or rendered inactive. His leadership style became more authoritarian, relying on secrecy, loyalty, and surveillance. National service. From patriotism to permanence. In 1995, the government introduced mandatory national service for all citizens, both military and civil. Originally meant to last 18 months, it was intended to build national unity and self-sufficiency. However, under Isaias's rule, national service became open-ended, with many citizens conscripted for years or even decades. This policy would later become one of the most controversial aspects of his presidency. Foreign relations and regional posturing. During this period, Eritrea pursued an assertive foreign policy. It had tense relations with Sudan, accusing it of supporting Islamist insurgents. Initially, Eritrea maintained close ties with Ethiopia, especially with the new TPLF-led government. Isaias began positioning Eritrea as a military and ideological force in the Horn of Africa. But in 1998, everything changed. A border dispute with Ethiopia would erupt into full-scale war, plunging the country back into conflict and setting Eritrea on a course of isolation, repression, and militarization that continues to define it today.